Hi, I'm Earl Fisher, and you're watching a podcast where nostalgia comes alive. It's Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show. And get ready to wiggle!
Welcome to Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, where nostalgia comes alive. Join Jake and his friends on a journey through pop culture of the past, where they interview professionals in the worlds of acting, directing, writing, puppeteering, and so much more. Who will they be chatting with today? Find out in this Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this wonderful episode of Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, the podcast where nostalgia comes alive. Happy with us. Thank you for joining. As always, I'm your host, Jake Davenport. And today, as always, our co-host, Chris Bixby. How's it going, my friend?
Doing wonderful. Hello, everybody. How are you, Jake?
Yes, that's wonderful to hear. I'm doing great as always, Chris. Thank you for asking.
Yes, we have a guest co-host joining us for this one. You may have seen him in our interview with Murray Cook, the original Red Wiggle of the Wiggles, as well as our interview with Jennifer Batten, one of Michael Jackson's touring guitarists. His name is Tyler. How are you doing today, Tyler?
It's a pretty good resume you just listed for me. That's pretty. Murray Cook and Jennifer Batten. That's not bad.
Right.
Pretty good. And I think after
That's
today,
perfect.
After today, it's gonna get even better. I feel like for sure.
Yes.
Yes, it is indeed.
Yes, and by the shirt, you can take a guess. You can maybe take a guess on who we spoke with by what Tyler's wearing and also the things that Jake and I have in our backgrounds.
We are talking to Anthony Field today. It's gonna be so exciting. It's gonna be really good. I'm kidding.
You're close
Tyler.
though. You're close though.
You're so close. Come on.
No.
He is close because today we did speak with original Yellow Wiggle Greg Page, the amazing Greg Page. And throughout the chat, we talk about kind of how his time with the Wiggles started, how he met the guys, Murray, Jeff, Anthony, and Philip. Can't forget about Philip.
We love you, Philip.
We talk about stories from recording albums with the Wiggles and songwriting and touring in Australia and then getting, big over here in the US. We touch base on his cardiac arrest experience in 2020 and some of the work he's done since that experience, as well as what he's working on now, playing Franklin D. Roosevelt in the Australian musical adaptation of Annie. These and more with our wonderful guest, Greg Page. So without further ado, let's not waste any more time. Here's Greg.
Yes, that's all wiggling to our chat with Greg. See you then.
Yes.
Greg.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show, the podcast where nostalgia comes alive.
Yes, today we are very pleased to welcome to the podcast the wonderful Greg Page. Greg, happy to have you here. How are you?
Thanks. Yeah, really great to be with you. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Delighted
Yeah,
to have
of
you
course.
here.
Delighted. Yes, exactly.
So to kick this off, I'm sure, obviously a lot of people know who you are, but for the people who don't, could you kind of tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So people would probably best know me as the original Yellow Wiggle. So from 1991 through to 2006, I wore the yellow shirt with the Wiggles. And then I left in '06, and then I didn't do a lot in that space of time. But more recently, I founded a charity here in Australia called Heart of the Nation. And so the last 5 years of my life have been dedicated to that charity, raising awareness about CPR and AEDs or defibrillators.
Wonderful. Nice.
Wonderful. Yes, exactly. So, can you kind of talk about, what was your childhood like, and did you always, interested in music?
Yeah, look, I was always interested in music from as long as I can remember, actually. It was probably 3 years old. I can remember singing songs and wanting to put on concerts for my family. I don't know how old I was when I got my first sort of toy musical instrument. It was just like a toy guitar or a toy saxophone or toy trumpet, something like that. But yeah, always been fascinated by music. My parents used to take my sister and myself to a lot of concerts that would happen in Sydney at the Opera House. In particular, I remember going to those. I remember we went to one outdoor concert somewhere. I don't know where it was, but it was a performance of Beethoven's 1812 Overture. If you guys happen to know that, it
Right,
features
yes.
cannon fire
Great
in
classical
the
piece of
thing.
music, yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so I remember going along to this and being terrified about the cannons going off. I thought, oh my goodness, people are firing cannons. But yeah, look, that was the kind of childhood I had in terms of music. Mum and Dad used to have the radio on all the time with music playing. So I guess it's no surprise that I kind of gravitated towards music. I guess people will say, is it nature or is it nurture? Well, I think in my case, I think it's kind of a bit of both. I think I was born with a predisposition for loving music, but also the fact that my parents had music around all the time, it kind of helped steer me in that direction.
Lovely, it's lovely.
Awesome. So Greg, I must warn you. A lot of our listeners today kind of do know the sort of main story of the Wiggles. So we're going to be getting into a little bit of a deep dive with you today. So let's talk about kind of coming up and getting more interested in music. So in high school, you had a band called Dead Giveaway, which something I can relate to you on. I was in a band in high school as well, and I'm still in that band 6 years later. So tell us a little bit about kind of getting into that stage of your life, and did performing with Dead Giveaway and any other bands you played with in high school kind of, I don't know, did that experience kind of fold into how you approach performing with the Wiggles at all?
Yes. The first band I was a part of in high school, I was just playing guitar in that band, and there were other singers, and they were in the older years, the older grades. And when they left school, we needed a singer, and I kind of said, "Well, look, I'll give it a go." I'd never sung properly before; I just always sang at home, and I gave it a go and just kind of stuck with it, and I guess honed my art a little bit. I wouldn't say I became very good at it, but I honed it better than it was. And I also performed in a couple of musicals at high school, which kind of helped with confidence.
Gotcha.
Then the band, then the band that I was in, Dead Giveaway, we kind of had some outside people from school in that band. We started doing band competitions. I also then had a band at high school called Pink Chair. We did band competitions as well. So I had a lot of experience performing, which really helped me with my confidence because not being a singer, kind of had to develop that sort of front man charisma or persona to try and, you know, make the band something, right? I mean, music is one thing, and you can have an amazing band to sit and listen to, but it can be very boring if they're not entertaining to watch as well, and they've got to be engaging. And I think that's where my love for another band called the Cockroaches came in. And so the Cockroaches were a band that were, you know, in the top 40 charts here in Australia when I was 15 years old. They had a top uh, number one hit in Australia called She's the One. And
Yeah,
through a
great
number of
song.
circumstances, yeah, it is a great song.
Of
And
course.
through a number of circumstances, I ended up meeting some of the guys in the band, and I ended up doing work experience for them in high school. And I did work experience as a sound engineer. And yeah, then look, as things happened, I got to know the guys in the band a little bit better. Two of those guys were Anthony Field and Jeff Fatt, who ended up being part of the Wiggles. So it was really that love of music. And when Anthony saw my band perform, he realized that I could sing. And so when we ended up together at university studying early childhood, that's when the idea for the Wiggles came about for Anthony, and he knew that I could sing a bit. So we combined teaching with music, and the genesis of the Wiggles was spawned there at university.
Very cool,
Nice.
super cool.
That's awesome. So it's actually a perfect transition. So, to tell us about like kind of brief way, what was like, your decision to enroll in Macquarie University?
So yeah, look, I I knew that I wanted to do something with music in my life. And I thought, well, look, I'm not going to be a professional performer because number one, I didn't think I was good enough to be. Number two, I didn't really have the opportunity to be a professional performer. So I thought if I could do anything, I'd still want to do something with music, and therefore I could work in the background, being a sound engineer, being a roadie, carrying cases up and downstairs. And it was Anthony Field, the Blue Wiggle, who was in the Cockroaches at this point in time, who said to me, "Look, Greg, you probably don't want to be doing this when you're 50 years old." Yeah, because I'm not the most robust of people. I was fairly skinny back then, and people lifting gear all the time, you end up with a crook back. And that's what he said to me. He said, "You don't want to have a stuffed back by the time you're 50 years old." And he said, "What else do you want to do?" I said, "Well, look, if there's anything I could do, it'll be something that involves music somehow." And I always remembered my teachers in grade school, bringing guitars in and singing whenever they could. I had 3 or 4 teachers who could play guitar. And I remember that impacted me. And I thought, well, look, if I can use my ability to sing and play a guitar to impact children and steer them on a path where they can love music as well, I thought, well, that would be fantastic. But Anthony then said, well, if you want to use music in teaching, the best way to do it is through early childhood teaching. He said, come and have a look at the course that I'm doing at Macquarie University and find out a bit more about early childhood teaching and how much creativity plays a part in early childhood education. So that's what I did. I went and had a look at his course, found out about it, and went and had a look at the 600 girls that were there and the 5 guys, and it was pretty much a no-brainer. No, it wasn't the girls
Yeah.
that swayed it. Really, it was one thing was the fact that Anthony was there and that I'd have somebody that I knew.
Right.
Although Anthony was in year 3 when I was in first year, so he was in his final year.
Right.
And also Murray Cook was there studying to be a teacher. And Murray, as a lot of people may know, ended up becoming the red wiggle as I became the yellow and Anthony became the blue wiggle. So it's there where we really met and came together and had this kind of meeting of minds where we all kind of went, well, look, we're musicians, we love music, we love educating children. How can we combine this all together? And it was Anthony's inspiration, really, from listening to a whole range of styles of early childhood music from all over the world. And he said, why don't we write some of our own material? We'll record some traditional songs as well, and we'll do something. And that something ended up being the Wiggles.
That's wonderful.
Excellent.
Exactly.
I'm glad you did touch on that. I was gonna ask now, obviously, like especially in the early '90s, I would imagine preschool teaching it was kind of seen as like a woman's job. So I would say that with there was like 4 or 5 guys total in your class, was it?
Maybe 6 in the whole
Maybe 6.
whole university there.
So
Yeah.
I'd imagine that sort of you and Anthony and Murray ended up hanging out a lot. Obviously, that kind of led to talk to me a little bit about the camaraderie in university and kind of how you guys decided. Were you guys jamming a lot? Were you guys just kind of talking a lot about music? Because I know Anthony has his 10,000 ideas a minute, obviously. So
Yeah. Well, look, we did end up hanging out a lot, but it wasn't sort of all of the time because our classes didn't always coincide. But when they did, when we had time at the campus together and we had lunchtime spare, we'd go up to the music rooms and we'd start jamming on songs. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. We did so many different things. I mean, I remember we performed at the university with our busking group that included Anthony's brother, John Field. So we did do a lot of stuff together. And it was at the end of first year in university, actually, of my first year. Anthony and Murray were finishing third year. And Anthony called me up one day and said, look, why don't we do an album of songs? Because we had been jamming, we'd been talking about early childhood music. And as I said, Anthony knew that I could sing a little bit. So he thought, well, let's use this skill set that we have amongst the 3 of us. And at that stage, we had involved Philip Wiltshire from the music staff department there at university as well. So the 4 of us had all these different skill sets, and we got together and recorded the first album, which was called The Wiggles. Yeah, that's really how it all came about because we did spend quite a lot of time together. And then from second year onwards, I was kind of doing, well, actually, no, it was third year because the album came out when I was in second year. So August 91, I think the first album came out. But, to your point, Tyler, about men and women in the space. There's still not a lot of men in the space, I don't think. I think there's probably more, but it's still heavily outweighed, I think, female to male ratios. But yeah, it was different for guys back then to be in early childhood teaching in particular. More males would probably be high school teachers and primary school teachers, we call them here in Australia, not doing sort of daycare and preschool, those kinds of roles. But it was a good grounding for us because it really taught us that when you are with children, people do look at you skeptically and sometimes cynically, and they think, why are you doing this? It's really weird. It's like, yeah, aren't men also fathers? Don't men just love kids as well? And don't they have
Exactly. Yes.
a role to play in a
Exactly.
child's
Yeah.
life? So why is it so weird that a male would want to be a significant person in a child's life? It's so weird. But
Exactly.
anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, it's bizarre. And I guess to that point, then when we ended up forming the Wiggles and not going out to teach, our university lecturers were kind of disappointed because there were even less males out there now in the field in classrooms
Mhm.
having that role in children's lives and being seen by parents. But we did, and they accepted this too, and they acknowledged it, that we did end up playing a larger role in so many more children's lives and being
Oh
those
yeah.
role models for children. And I think as I was going to say, as wrong as it was, because it wasn't wrong that there were four men in the group. I guess if we could have created it differently, we would have included women. But I do think the fact that it was four males to begin with, as the Wiggles, it did kind of bring attention to that and raise awareness about the fact that, yeah, men can be positive role models for children. Men can dance, men can sing, and so can young boys and young girls. They can aspire to be anything they want because you don't have to be male or female. You can be any gender at all. You can identify as anything and still love music, dance, and creativity.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So now, you talked a little bit about, the debut album, of course. What was that whole like recording process like? Because, the sound on that first album is obviously a lot different from like how Wiggles albums, years later sounded. So can you kind of talk about kind of like the recording process of kind of, you know, writing and, recording all these like first songs for the Wiggles?
Yeah. So, I guess the sound was a lot more primitive than it ended up being. It became a lot more polished and more full production years later. But that first album, the idea, I mean, if you had have listened to some of the stuff that Anthony was listening to back then and the stuff that inspired him, you'd understand why that album sounded so raw and so basic, particularly the traditional songs that we did on that album. But then there were songs that we wanted to do, songs like Dorothy the Dinosaur and Get Ready to Wiggle, that were a little bit more pop influenced. And so for those songs, we needed a pop or, more contemporary sound. And to get that sound, we decided to borrow the keyboard that belonged to Jeff Fatt, who was the keyboard player for the Cockroaches. And I remember going to Jeff's house to pick up his keyboard because Jeff wasn't part of the group at this point in time, right? It was just Murray, me, Anthony, and Philip. And then when we needed that sort of more pop influenced sound, we borrowed Jeff's keyboard. And then we got it into the studio and we worked out that we didn't really know how to operate it. So we had to call Jeff to come in and operate the keyboard. And in particular, we wanted some sequencing done. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that term, but
Mhm.
back in the day, the keyboard itself could actually sequence different drum beats,
Yeah.
different
Mhm.
Right.
melodies and things. So Jeffrey Fatty programmed the sequencing that we needed for those songs. And I think it was shortly after that we decided, look, Jeff has some skills, even though he's not early childhood trained and doesn't really understand early childhood music. He's got some skills that we could use him for in this group. And he was a good guy to have around too. He's just a lot of fun, Fatty. He's so laid back and he's so cash. So it was kind of at that point that Jeff became a part of the group. And so he was part of that first album ultimately. So yeah, the sound was, I'll call it primitive, um, but it definitely had a purpose as to why it was primitive. It really wasn't intended to be released in the form that it was in. It was
Mhm.
only intended to be a demo album to take to a record company and get some funding to go and record a better version of the songs. But when we gave the album on tape to ABC Music, they said they loved it and they didn't think it needed to be re-recorded. So that was kind of a happy bonus. We'd done the demo and the final product in one go.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Now, on the topic of the debut album, Philip Wilcher is actually a friend of the show, and I figured I would share these
Yes,
with
he
you. We
is.
actually have some photographs from that era, so I believe this would be a very young Greg Page during
That's
the
very young. I'd be 19, I'd say there, I
19
reckon.
there. We've got a got a very candid shot of Murray.
Murray, yep.
Looks like you and
This guy's
Anthony
too.
on the
What's
couch
that one?
there. Looks like you and Anthony on the couch doing something.
Oh, look at those striped shorts. Oh my gosh. Jeez.
And then you got another Murray there. But
See, Murray's always wearing red anyway. Look at him.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
voila, why wiggle? Yeah.
That was an easy decision.
Right, yeah.
Sorry, say that
They
again.
always wear red all the time.
Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, well, I never wore yellow though, so I had to buy a yellow skivvy when we went for the colours. But yeah, Murray already had red in his wardrobe.
I think yellow may have been a more flattering color than the shirt you wore on the debut album. Personally,
Just slightly, yeah.
just slightly.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So now, briefly to Philip Wiltshire, or quickly, of course, he's different virus, of course, a previous guest, huge part of the show, like what Tyler already said. And of course, his contributions for what he did early on during the group start, of course, will never be forgotten. And he told me, musically wise, that's kind of like how the way it musically was for him kind of to approach the debut album to be kind of how it was. I think it was a great thing and that. So can you kind of the first place? So can you kind of talk about like what was your experience getting to work with Philip during the process for your debut album?
Yeah, so Philip was and probably still is. I haven't seen Philip in many years, but he was back then a very gifted classical pianist, and that was really where his skill set lay. And I think in the scheme of the first album, where that sort of fitted in was because Anthony had this view that music for children should be all encompassing. It shouldn't just be one style or one genre. So to have Philip's classical influence, to have Anthony and Murray's rock influence, and I guess mine as well, and then the overlap with sort of folk music and world music, it was really an all encompassing approach to creating quality children's music. So that's really where Philip's thing came in. And then, as I recall it was just before the first album was released, actually in August. It might have even been the week before, the week leading up to the release of the first album. I think Philip decided that, for him, it wasn't about the live performance side of things. It was more the recording side of things. So he decided to resign or withdraw from the group because it became clear sort of early on in the decisions of management that, and I guess this is because our manager at the time, Jeremy Fabini, was a rock band manager. He managed the Cockroaches. He also managed a band called Mental as Anything quite successfully over the years. And I guess the history of having albums out is that when you have an album out, you've got to promote it. And the way you promote it is number one through airplay on radio stations, and nobody was going to play a children's album on radio stations, or through touring. You had to get out there and show people what you do to raise awareness about the fact that you've got an album out. So it really shifted from being a recording project, which I know Anthony really wanted it to becoming another live working band sort of project. And I think, as history would kind of state, the fact that the Wiggles became a live touring act is really what contributed towards its success, because it was different to anything else that was out there for children at the time. There was no other sort of rock band for kids. There was no other groups for children. There were solo artists, there were solo performers for children, certainly in Australia. But in terms of a group of performers doing contemporary sounding songs that parents could listen to as well as the kids, it was very different. So I think, the whole way that it happened is kind of what had to happen for it to be successful. And so I think that whole transition from being that recording project that Anthony originally envisaged to becoming that full touring thing really helped propel it on its way to being able to be successful in other territories like the US, Canada, and the UK.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, I would assume that Cook, Field, Fatt, Page, or whatever it may be, may have, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands, of songs with that credit. What would you say sticks out to you as a I don't know, it's just like maybe like a story about how a song came about, or writing in the studio, or anything that jumps out as you as like a particular memory about writing a certain song in the studio, or
Yeah, there was a song. I've got to remember what it's called. I think it's called "Wave to Wags." Hey, everybody,
Okay.
Yeah,
wave to wags. It's
it's a great
oh,
I
song.
I
think
love
it
that
was
song.
on.
Yeah,
I
great
think it was on
track.
Wake Up Jeff.
Hmm.
It was
Yeah,
on Wake
uh-huh.
Up Jeff here in Australia. I don't know how it got released in the US or other territories, but here
Yeah,
in Australia, it was
it
on
was a
Wake
whole
Up
thing.
Jeff. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure. And I remember that, because we'd write songs in various ways. Sometimes somebody would come with a sort of whole song complete with the lyrics, the melody, the chords, and everything. Sometimes we'd just have a bit of a groove happening with some chords and no lyrics, or maybe a bit of an idea for lyrics. Now, I can't remember with this one whether John Field may have had a part of this. I think he may have. I'd have to check the songwriting lyrics, but sorry, the songwriting credits. But with the lyrics, I know for this one, there were no real lyrics at the time, and we were laying down the beds, the rhythm tracks, the drums, the bass, and the guitars and keyboards, because we'd often do that live. We'd just kind of, work up the song and then lay it all down. And I'd be singing guide vocals. So I'd sort of come up with a melody a lot of the time, just doing guide vocals, and the same with lyrics. And I remember I was literally lying on the lounge in the recording studio, just sort of kind of half-heartedly doing these guide vocals. And it got to the line, he runs around. I think this is right. He runs around, he kicks his legs. Well, he loves that bacon and he loves those eggs. So that line was just a throwaway guide vocal line that was never intended to be lyrics about loving bacon and loving eggs. But the guys laughed and they went, "Oh, that's funny," and they kept it in. So I think that's kind of like, for me, sums up the way that we did our songs, right? Particularly later in the career of the Wiggles, we were touring a lot and we had commitments to produce albums and TV series and DVDs or videos. So we became very, very busy. So a lot of our songs were done in that way, where we'd just work up an idea, literally lay it down, and sometimes we'd have just a week in the studio to get it done. So we'd just get in the studio, we'd smash it out, we'd get the musos in, and we'd just lay down tracks. And a lot of the time, the guide vocals just came about, just as what you're singing at the time. And sometimes those lyrics would stick, like it did with that one in Wave to Wags.
Nice.
That's a really cool story. That was all. Thank you for sharing that, Greg. That was really cool.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So now with songwriting, this is kind of an interesting question. So did you like, were there any songs that you wrote like or pitched that like never made it like to an album or anything?
Look, probably, and I probably don't remember those ones. The ones I remember are the ones that only just scraped it in, to be honest. God, there was a song on, gosh, I think it was on Wiggly Wiggly Christmas, and I think it's called Reindeer Express.
Yeah,
And
Yeah,
I
uh-huh.
yeah.
remember,
Love that song.
I remember writing the song, and I remember thinking, oh, there's something in this. Um, and I played it for the guys, and I know Anthony in particular was kind of like, yeah, it's kind of a nothing song. But there was something about it that I liked, and I just pushed for it to get on the album, and it made it on. But it really is kind of a nothing song in the end when I look back on it in years later. So it's more those ones that I remember having stories about. And there was one that Anthony wrote. I remember he came into the studio one day. He was so excited. He said, "Guys, I've written the next hot potato." And for us, the most iconic songs were Hot Potato and Rockabye Your Bear, because they were just so easily embraced by children because the actions were so simple. And particularly with Rockabye Your Bear, the words went so well with the actions, but we'd never really hit on another hot potato. I think, John Field was kind of the mastermind behind Hot Potato, and we'd been waiting for him to deliver us another hot potato, and we hadn't really had one. And I don't know what year this was, but I think it's on the Hoop Doo album. And we're in the studio laying down the album. Anthony comes in. He's so excited. He goes, "Guys, I've done it. I've got the next hot potato." And we thought, "Oh my God, Anthony's done it. He's got the next hot potato. This is going to be brilliant." And we said, "Okay, let's hear it." and he sang it for us. And it was a song that went like this: wobbly, wobbly, wobbly dance.
Yes. I remember that
Wobbly,
song.
Yeah,
wobbly, wobbly
of course.
dance.
Jump back
Then
inside the
jump to the left,
fire.
turn to the right, whatever it is, I can't
Wanna
remember.
shake it
But
a while.
Yeah.
we kind of listened to that and we went, so where's the part that's like the next hot potato? And we were underwhelmed by it, to say the least. And he was so
Oh,
disappointed because
Goodness.
he'd worked himself up into thinking,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
this is going to be the next hot potato. Now, look, that's not to say it's not a great song. And this is the thing, right? The Wiggles had so many songs. I think, Tyler, I think you said that, probably had hundreds or thousands of songwriting credits with Cook, Fatt, Field, Page. And I think we do, thousands, literally. But, not every song can be a hit, but it doesn't mean it's not a good song, right? So I think, whilst I don't think Wobbly Wobbly Dance was ever the next hot potato. It's still a great song, and kids would love doing it. But to come up with the next hot potato or the next Rockabye You Bear, it's going to be a pretty mean feat. It's going to have to be a pretty killer tune,
Yeah.
and lyrics that go with it to match
Yeah,
those two. And again,
exactly.
that's not to say that the Wiggles haven't had brilliant songs since, but for whatever reason it is, whatever magic it is about those songs, I don't know that the Wiggles have really surpass those two. I think they'll always kind of go down as being the two top songs.
every band needs their hits. You got your hits,
Exactly.
Yeah, and look, I mean, I still think songs like Monkey Dance and Can You Point Your Fingers and Do the Twist, even Romp Bumper Stomp, Drothy, they're all great songs and kids love doing them. And I guess the fact that the current Wiggles are still redoing some of those old Wiggles songs mean that they've stood the test of time. They don't have to be a hot potato or a rockabye you bear to be able to have that longevity and be relevant to kids today.
Exactly.
Now, well, with that topic, what would you say is your favorite song that you wrote for the Wiggles?
Favorite song that I wrote, I think I would probably have to say, Can You Point Your Fingers and Do the Twist? Because it pretty much was all my song. Maybe Anthony came up with a second verse, I think. Oh, no. Actually, it was Slide It originally. It was Slide It, oh, slide it, and clap your hands.
Oh,
Dun,
wow.
dun, 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 dun.
Wow.
And I
Oh,
was imagining
wow.
Slide It to the side and clap your hands.
Oh,
And
that's
Anthony said,
cool.
oh, no,
Interesting.
Huh.
let's change it. Let's do something else. So yeah, no, it wasn't all me, but the melody and the arrangement that I heard in my head with the horn lines and that, I told Fatty how to play them on the what I wanted to hear on the keyboard. So I kind of feel like I can say that was mostly mine, but
That's
yeah,
cool.
no, it
Yeah.
really was such a group
Was that
effort,
all
really
Jeff?
writing the songs.
Was that all Jeff?
Sorry, mate.
Was that Jeff that keyboard intro? That was
Oh yeah, that so
that was
the
the
keyboard intro that was totally him.
that one. That's
Can't hear that unfortunately, but
you can't.
that looked
Oh,
good.
not.
It looked good.
It sounded right to my
Um,
ears, I think. But
It probably was. Yeah, I mean, Fatty, yeah, came up with that. I mean, Fatty's just, I love listening to him play piano. I love listening to his organ. He's just so cool. And, if you, I just, I'd love it if Fatty just recorded an album of piano music and organ music. One of my favorite songs to listen to from the Wiggles is actually Porcupine Pie. I don't know if you guys remember that
Yes.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
uh-huh. Yeah, what a weird track.
Wiggly Wiggly World. If you listen to that,
Mhm.
it's like a electric piano or Wurlitzer kind of sound solo that he plays. I love listening to that because I remember watching him play that in the studio, and I just remember seeing his fingers move over the keyboard just so gracefully, and he's just a genius.
Dun, dun,
That's
dun, dun,
awesome.
dun, dun,
Yeah,
dun,
it's such a
dun.
great
Yeah,
song.
uh-huh.
that wasn't the
And
sound.
the little
What was
I don't know what they
sound?
call it, but like the grace notes or the extra
Yeah.
I don't know what they call it, but where he sort of slides into a note, just brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Of course.
we're
absolutely.
talking about some really cool songs here today, guys. I wasn't expecting to touch on some of these. This is really cool.
I know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's a nostalgia show, right? Happy
Absolutely.
nostalgia.
Exactly.
Yes,
There you
absolutely.
go.
Yes.
So obviously from 91, for kind of like the first 10 years of the Wiggles, every album to me was kind of a step in terms of arrangements, production, and everything. And a lot of that attributes to musicians such as Dom Lindsay, Terry Murray, Steve Blau, John Field. So what was it like kind of getting to work with some of these musicians? And I imagine you guys kind of probably writing a song pretty bare bones, just with a guitar or whatever, and then kind of having Dom Lindsay turn them into a full-on symphony, or Terry Murray doing these crazy chops. It's like, what was it like working with some of these masterclass musicians?
Yeah, so I think Terry was mostly in the earlier days, probably up until I don't know what the last album he played on was. Maybe Wake Up Jeff. He may have played on Wiggly Wiggly Christmas. I'm not sure, but yeah, around about that time, maybe 96, 97. And there was a bit of overlap there with Terry and Dom Lindsay and those musos coming in. But Terry was somebody that we met early on in the days of the Wiggles when we were doing live performances with ABC for Kids, which was a brand of shows that did live gigs around the country. And he was working with another artist at that time named Gillian Eastoe, and we just loved watching him play. And he was actually particularly good at Western swing style music.
Mm.
And so when there was a song on Wake Up. Oh well, he played on Henry's Dance. Henry.
That's kind of the one in my head when I think of Terry, that particular
And he
song.
did all the harmonics in that song, and
Yeah.
that was kind of well, that would have been Big Red Car. I'm
Yeah.
thinking that was
Hmm.
released
Yeah.
here in Australia, the album. So that would have been 94. So probably from 93, around that sort of time, we were influenced by Terry a lot with his guitar. Then I guess Dom Lindsay came in around 96, 90, 95, maybe. I think maybe Dom might have played on, he definitely played on Wake Up Jeff. Might have played some horns on Big Red Car. I'm not sure. But anyway, there was kind of that overlap around that time, about 95, 96. And I think it was really just being exposed to these different musicians and different styles that they were influenced by as well, and bringing their own talents and their own experience to the songs that we'd created. And as you're saying, Tyler, a lot of the time we'd either be in the studio all together, and whatever Dom might be jamming on as we're laying down the tracks kind of influenced the way that the beds might have gone. But then a lot of the time we just lay down the beds and we'd go away on tour and we'd leave it to Dom to bring in these other musicians as well. And a lot of the time it included his sisters on
Yes.
violin
Hmm.
and cello,
Oh
Angela,
yeah.
Margaret, and Maria. They'd come in, the
Yeah.
Lindsay sisters, and they'd do the strings, and you had the strings, you had the horns, and it really did become this kind of orchestral feast in terms of the musicality of what the Wiggles did. And I think for me, I really love some of those arrangements where you've got that happening. But I think it was around the time of like Network Wiggles, so whatever album that was, like I don't know if it was an album
Yeah.
called Lights Camera Action, but there were songs from our TV series. And when we had to do all those songs, we definitely were away on tour. We just kind of came up with the beds, the ideas, and the lyrics. And Dom came in and basically produced them along with a guy called Robin Gist, who was the engineer at Tracking, what was it called? Electric Avenue at the time, Electric Avenue Studios. And Robin would sort of produce the album for us under Anthony's supervision. I remember we had this massive chart on the wall, and it would have all the song titles, would have what Anthony wanted on each song, horns, backing vocals, Manzillas, we used to call them the Manzillas, and that was
Hmm.
Mark Punch. I think Simon Price was in the Manzillas in those days, and there was probably a
Yeah.
third
Uh-huh.
voice. Can't remember who made up maybe the third voice in the Manzillas. Brett Clark, maybe.
Brett Clark, Sam
I think
Moran.
Sam Moran might have been in the
Yeah, and
Manzillas.
and and
It was
someone
just
else who we recently interviewed who was also part of the Manzilla's team, Ryan DeSaulnier.
Yeah. I love
Ryan, yeah.
Ryan. He's
Yeah.
awesome.
So I think, it was just this kind of collective term, the Manzillas, just get the Manzillas in there. And it was really just that sound of, four layers of harmony, a bass voice, two mids and a top soprano. But yeah, Mark Punch was a very distinct voice in that group. And
Oh yeah,
yeah, so we'd go away on tour and come
For
back and
sure.
we'd hear these songs that we just left as bare bones on the tape in the studio, and they'd come back to us as these fully produced things, which is quite amazing.
absolutely.
That's awesome.
Of course.
So
I'm a big fan of that kind of early 2000s big orchestral sound. I'm like, it's a wiggly wiggly world, and you'll be wiggling.
Yeah, I love those albums.
Like,
I
just
think
can't just can't wait for Christmas Day comes to mind.
Yeah,
oh yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Yeah, so that's a great song. I think that was a John Field masterpiece, that one that came from Johnny. But yeah, I remember being on tour, like we'd get we'd get the tracks sent to us. When we had email back in the day, somebody'd send us the tracks to have a listen to, and we'd just go, yeah, okay, we'll change this, change that, and yeah, it was certainly an interesting way to be doing music back in those days. Now, I mean, people collaborate all over the world through the internet. It's just a given that that's how you write songs and record albums these days.
Yeah, and speaking of John Field and kind of like the holiday albums, because we've talked a little bit about them, one song that always comes to mind that's a John Field classic that just such a beautiful song musically and lyrically is Unto Us This Holy Night. It
Oh
go,
yes, now it's
in a
gosh,
manger, in a
in
stable.
a
Unto
stable,
us this
unto
holy
us
night,
this
a
holy
little
night.
baby's
Yeah,
born.
great
Yeah,
song.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a brilliant song. Mother Mary. Yeah, yeah, fantastic. Yeah, he had a real gift. So there was that one. Gosh, he wrote a number of great songs.
One that comes to mind for me is "And the World."
Bells are
And
ringing
yep, I was about to say "And the World
dun,
Is One" on
dun,
Christmas morning. That's
on the
my first
Christmas
one.
morning. Yeah,
that love that track. It was
yeah.
beautiful.
Beautiful.
I mean, he's just such an incredible songwriter. Like you could just sort of sit down with him and he just starts strumming a guitar. He'd come up with some chords, and within 2 or 3 minutes, he's got not just the chords, he's got the melody. And then sometimes he'd have some lyrics, but then it wouldn't take him long, and he'd just have a brilliant song. I don't know how many songs he's written all up. I mean, he's written a couple of musicals as well, so
Oh yeah.
he's very
A lot
prolific
of
with his
wonderful
songwriting.
musicals. Yeah,
For sure.
absolutely. So now moving on to kind of the touring side of things. What was that very first performance of the Wiggles like? What type of songs did you like perform in those early shows, at a time when you hadn't written, all the songs that you've written, later on?
Yeah, it was really just songs off our first album. So songs like Oki Toki Unga,
Yeah,
Goey Tai Tai A. Well, we did have Rockabye Ya Bear. We had Get Ready to Wiggle and
Of
Dorothy the
course,
Dinosaur.
classics.
Yeah, there's a lot of those sort of traditional songs together with those sort of ones that we'd written. But
nice.
it was very hard. I mean, we didn't because we were still kind of working out what we were. Like we knew that we'd written these songs, we knew that we intended to release them on an album, but we hadn't sort of sat in the groove yet in terms of live performance, in terms of what how were we going to present ourselves, what were our roles in this group. And it took a long time for us to find that, I think, but ultimately it ended up being that, we were just ourselves, we weren't sort of playing characters, we were ourselves. We were playing extensions of ourselves and, exaggerations or caricatures of ourselves in some way, but we weren't really pretending to be other characters. So we didn't have to act. And I guess that's why we kept our own names. We weren't playing characters, we were just ourselves.
Exactly.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah,
So I was wondering because like this wouldn't be uh very known information. Obviously, the start of a Wiggles tour, is always different from the end of a Wiggles tour. So have there ever been any live songs you guys tried out maybe early in a tour, but it was just kind of a dud, the audience wasn't feeling it, and just kind of never touched again? Was there? Oh boy, let's.
Oh, yeah. Again, I can't really remember specifically, but yeah, absolutely, there would have been. I know there were, but I just can't remember what they were. But yeah, we'd try something and it just wouldn't work for whatever reason. Whether it's because some songs can be a great song and not translate live because, well, I don't know. This may this what I'm about to say may have been disproved later on by other versions of the Wiggles, but certainly back in our time, we were very heavily focused on the Wiggles live experience being about audience participation. And yes, you want the children to be engaged and doing something. Now, we always knew that when we wrote albums that there were different types of songs for kids. There were songs they could sing along to, songs they could dance along to, songs they could sing and dance to, and then there'd be just listening songs. So we were very aware of that. But at a live concert for the Wiggles, it was really about trying to keep that energy up and have that engagement at a high level throughout the show. So if we tried a song and it was a listening song and it didn't really get that engagement, then yes, we'd cut it. Or if there were songs
Right.
that were just too hard to do live in terms of like it didn't work out for choreography purposes or didn't work out instrument wise or whatever, then yeah, we would cut them. But again, I can't remember the specifics of that. But I think my gut feeling is that it would come down to that thing of it not being highly engaging enough, and just that it sort of feel the level go. And you don't want that because then you got to build that level back up again. But at the same time, you don't want kids to be absolutely exhausted and not
Right.
able to sustain their energy through the show.
Right, yeah, and so keep it to the ones that
Yeah.
worked, because then there's those songs that you almost kind of like have to do live because like at least during like the OG days, of course, every show at least kind of later on when the song became big would start with toot toot chugga chugga, and you'd come out in the car, all the dancers would come out, and of course like Rockabye Hot Potato and some songs. I know because I've seen a couple of your own like YouTube videos where you talked about songs that you really enjoyed doing live, and one that you mentioned quite a bit that I know you said you love doing live was the song Dancing in the Sand, which is a very kind of
Oh yeah.
energetic kind of
Yeah, I
song.
love that song. Yeah.
I love singing it live. I don't love the choreo. I'll
That's
leave that
fair.
to the dancers,
That's fair.
particularly these days. Yeah, no, it is. It's a great song. And again, another John Field masterpiece off the Wiggle Bay album. And yeah, it's just such a great melody. The Wiggles are here, Captain Feathersword too.
Yeah.
Da, da, da,
Yeah.
da, da, da. And
I've,
there's Dorothy drinking rose.
I've
Yeah,
a
it's a
really
great
interesting,
melody. I
a
love that.
really
And then,
in,
we're gonna clap three times in the sunshine. Yeah, I can't do it in the original key anymore. It's too high, but yeah.
a really interesting story about Dancing in the Sand. So when the OG Wiggle tour was announced a couple of years ago, I run an Instagram page called Wiggles Enthusiasts that kind of posts about just various Wiggles things, and I had become Instagram friends with Anthony through that. And he
Oh
had
yeah.
actually asked me to take a poll on what songs people wanted to hear. For better or for worse, you can blame me for Dancing in the Sand being in that tour.
That's all right. No,
Yeah,
that's fine.
Tyler.
Absolutely fine. Yeah, I love it. We started doing it in, I think it was in C originally. And yeah, I just remember, particularly, when you're moving around a bit and you're out of breath, it's really hard to get those high notes now. And my voice has probably aged a bit and dropped. So I think we ended up doing it in A, the key of A, which doesn't
Uh,
have as much punch, I don't think, but at least I could get most of those high notes.
right,
It's
yeah.
it's still kind of a wiggly key, you know.
Yeah.
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 Yeah, of course. So since we kind of already talked about, with, a little bit of videos and albums and such of things, now, can you kind of talk about briefly, what is it like, for you and the guys got to have opportunities to do several TV series and the Willis movies? What is it like, you and the guys getting to do those?
Yeah, look, it was really interesting. I think the first kind of TV opportunity that was presented to us outside of what we did ourselves was a show here in Australia called Neighbours, which was a long running, what do they call it? A serial, episodic show. It'd been running for many years at that point in time, and we got asked to appear in that. And I think at that point in time, when you get asked to appear in such a high profile show, you kind of know that you've made it into pop culture. So that was a real thrill and a real honor. Then kind of blew us away in the US because there was a show called Yes Dear, which was a comedy show, and we were
Yeah.
asked to be on that show. Now
Right.
that might not have been a huge show in the US, but still for us to realize that people in the US knew who we were and that they wanted to write us into the script on their show absolutely blew us away. And I remember going to Hollywood or wherever it was where we filmed this. We did a segment, a theatre there in LA, but then we went along to the filming of the final part of the show, which was great for us to see. And I got to say, when they told us about this show, I'd never heard of it, and I started watching it. I thought it was so funny. I thought it was so clever. And I absolutely fell in love with the show. And I just thought, what an honor to be a part of something like that. It really was. So, yeah, those kinds of things came up, those opportunities. And, you never took them for granted. But I've got to say, there's probably ones that I've forgotten about doing just because we ended up doing quite a few of them over the years, in amongst all the other stuff that we did, within the Wiggles world as well. So things that we did to appear on shows to promote our own things, like I think we did Jimmy Kimmel
Yep.
in maybe
Right. Uh-huh.
2006. I think I kind of remember. I don't know. It became a bit of a blur around that time in '06 when I started to get unwell. This one trip we did LA, then we were in New York the next day, then back to LA. It was just like literally crossing the states. I'm pretty sure it was Jimmy Kimmel that we did. I think. Oh God, I don't know. Yeah, somebody will have to
Just
look
part
it
of the
up.
mode or something.
It was
I
like
remember we did Can You
completely
Point Your Fingers and
opposite
Do the
ends of the
Twist?
country.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I
Yeah.
could be wrong on that. I might be remembering things incorrectly, but pretty sure it was Jimmy Kimmel Live that we did. But yeah, we did stacks of these things like the Today Show in the US, Good Morning America, so many of them. And it sounds pretty nonchalant to be kind of just going, look, I don't remember it, but I just honestly don't because I remember
We did
doing
so
some of them.
many.
Yeah, exactly.
We
You
Yeah,
did,
know,
we did, we did a
it's not
lot.
like we have to remember, you know.
Yeah,
exactly.
but I do remember the first time we did the Today Show in the US there at I think it's in Rockefeller Place or Plaza, outside where they have the live appearances. I remember being terrified, like live, like singing live on American national TV. I'd never done that before, and that was so daunting for me. It was terrifying, but you just did it, and then we ended up doing more of it and more of it, and like I said, to the point where I just can't remember all the times that we did them now.
Exactly. And I also want to quickly, touch up on, you know, kind of getting on the US market because, starting with like performing at Disneyland and then getting on Playhouse Disney and because we talked about kind of getting big in Australia, with, the ABC and the TV series and things like that. So what was it like for you and kind of the overall feeling of kind of getting on, the US market and becoming big over here?
So our first foray into TV in the US was on, I think it was called Fox Kids back in the day. That was through some contacts that we had through one of our partners in Australia. And that was amazing. Like to be on American TV, as small or large as it was incredible. But then to have the Disney Channel approach us about taking on our content, that's really when things kind of skyrocketed for us because we didn't know how many people had Disney Channel in their homes. And I think it was about 90 million homes or something like that had Disney Channel in them. And to go from being in however many homes Fox Kids was in compared to Disney Channel, we really saw a difference in terms of our notoriety throughout the US. And I guess when we started coming through the customs ports, at the airports in the US, and the customs agents started to recognize who we were because their kids had been watching the Wiggles, that's when we knew that we'd made it kind of big in the country. Because up until that point in time, we were coming in and out of the US trying to explain what we did and who we were and why we wanted a visa to come into the US and perform. But then once we made it onto Disney Channel, that all changed, and then we started doing ticketed events and people coming to our shows to see us in our own right, not just performing with the Barney show, the Barney Dinosaur had been touring around the US and we were
Yeah,
Yeah.
Barney's
performing at
Musical
intermission.
Castle. Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, Musical Castle.
So
Um,
cool.
so then to be able to do our own shows was really as a result of the popularity that we'd gained through being on Disney Channel.
Exactly.
I feel
Yeah,
like there's a grave chance that if it wasn't for the Disney Channel, the three of us probably would not be sitting here and talking to you today as Wiggles fans. I feel like
Or
so.
to
Yeah,
each other,
that's
really.
probably right.
yeah,
Yeah,
Or each
Yeah.
other.
exactly.
yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's actually a perfect segue. So, what's it like, for you and the guys getting to tour in the US? And do you have any of course, if you remember, do you have any favorite touring location that you and the guys got to perform around here?
Oh, look, there were so many. And we didn't often get to see a lot of the places that we played in, but places like New York and LA where we would sort of stay for multiple days on end
Yeah.
because we were doing, the populations were a lot bigger there, so we could stay. So I think New York probably has the uh, great memories of being in New York and playing Radio City Music Hall when that was with the Barney and his musical castle show.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Playing Radio City was a huge thrill. Playing Madison Square Garden, of course,
Of
too. That was a
course.
massive thrill. So things like
Definitely.
that kind of have really fond memories of. But we had great times on the road together. We really did get on very well. We had times where we could kill each other as well, but we did get on well together, and we enjoyed being in each other's company. Um, so yeah, such great memories of being on tour, being on stage together, and the fact that people like you guys could come along to our shows and have a great time
Oh yeah,
and go away happy
Exactly.
and have a connection to what we did. That's what it was all about for us. It was about providing an experience for kids and their families, something really positive that they could engage with. And I can see in the background all the paraphernalia you've got in your rooms there. Like, it's just amazing that the fact that something that we started back in 1991 with no real dream, no ambition other than to just create good quality entertainment for children actually worked. And there's the proof. Like, it's sitting right in front of me. The fact that you guys are now, I'm going to say, in your 20s,
Yep.
thereabouts. Yeah, right. You're in your 20s. You've got such a strong connection. You've got the merchandise still. It has made an impact, and it's so rewarding to know that something meaningful has
absolutely.
come from all that time that we spent creating this magical world of the Wiggles, and it's just so empowering to think that this lives on.
Definitely. And so now in 2012, when you got to actually come back, a couple months later, it was announced that then both Murray and Jeff would be leaving. And then there there was a celebration tour where you decided to officially end your time with the Wiggles as a more proper send-off and leave with Murray and Jeff. So can you kind of talk about that tour a little bit and kind of, I guess, kind of saying goodbye for the final time, at least until like the reunion shows and things like that happen, of course.
Yeah. So look, I was only ever back in 2012, actually, for 8 months. My contract was only till August. So I was going to be leaving then
Hmm.
anyway. They were going to bring somebody else in as the Yellow Wiggle. I was really just there to transition from Sam, who wasn't going to be continuing on, to transition from him to another Yellow Wiggle. And so my contract was August. Then, after everything sort of happened with the whole changeover, and Murray and Jeff said, look, I think it's probably time for us as well. We're going to call it a day at the end of the year in December on the sort of big show tour that we did in Australia. And then they said, well, Greg, will you stay on then to finish up with us in December as well? And I said, yeah, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. So I did the extra 3 or 4 months to finish with them at the end of December. So I would have been saying goodbye again in August, and that was always the case. And that was the way it was put to me when they asked me to come back. It was like, well, will you come back because Sam's not continuing? So can you come back? Then it'll give you a chance to say goodbye to the audience, because I never got to do that when I left in '06. I kind of left touring. I went from the US to come home and find out what was wrong, and never really got a chance to do a final show knowing it would be my final show. So this opportunity came up, and I thought, well, okay, I've got to get to do some more shows with the Wiggles. I'll get to actually do a Wiggles show and know it's my last one. But then that changed to being, well, it's going to be my last one, but with Murray and Jeff as well. So it kind of all worked out in the end, even though it was a bit of a bumpy road to get there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So now can you kind of like now moving on to like recent stuff now, of course, can you kind of talk about like your 2020 cardiac arrest experience at the Bushfire Relief Show that may lead to, the things that you're doing now from your
Yeah,
experience with that.
so after 2012, the Wiggles, or the OG Wiggles, started doing some concerts for people your age, people who had grown up with the Wiggles as kids, and then they were older now, and so we started doing shows in pubs and clubs around Australia. The first few of them were done as fundraisers, and so in 2020, there'd been bushfires throughout much of the east coast of Australia and devastated a lot of the area. And Anthony sent an email around saying, look, can we get together and do a show to raise some money for the bushfires? Which we did, and we sold out 2 concerts. And it was at the first concert that we did on the Friday night, the 17th of January. One day after turning 48, I had my birthday the day before on the 16th of January. So on the 17th of January, where they're doing the show, and at the end of the show, my heart suddenly stopped and I needed to be resuscitated. Um, so luckily for me, there were people around who knew how to do CPR, and there was an AED, or automated external defibrillator, at the venue that the bystanders were able to access and use, and they were able to restart my heart, thank God. Because if they weren't, I don't think I'd be here today. You know, the paramedics were still not there at that point in time when my heart restarted, and it was literally, moments away from likely not being able to be restarted again. So that really spurred me on to, knowing that the survival rate from cardiac arrest is so low. It's only 1 in 20 that survive a cardiac arrest. So 5% get to go home to their families like I did. And that spurred me on to create a charity called Heart of the Nation, which raises awareness about cardiac arrest and the need for bystanders to be able to step up and do what those bystanders did for me and save my life. And we know that more lives can be saved when there are more bystanders around who can actually call, push, shock. And calling emergency services, push hard and fast in the middle of the chest, and shock using an AED is something that anyone can do without any training required, no certification required whatsoever. Anyone can do it. You just got to give it a go, and you could save somebody's life.
I must say you've done a lot of great work with that. So I'm very, 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 very
Yes.
pleased with the work that you do with them.
Yeah.
Well,
Yes,
yeah,
we
and I
do.
don't know if you
Yeah,
guys
so
heard
great to
the
hear about
news just
that.
this week, actually, but our charity has actually been taken over. The work that we do, the brand and the staff, has been taken over by the Heart Foundation of Australia. So the fact that they've recognised the great work that we've done and that they want to continue that on with the brand Heart of the Nation is really a proud moment for me, because
Hmm.
5 years ago, the Heart Foundation wasn't doing that kind of work in Australia. That's why I started
Uh,
Heart of the Nation. The Heart Foundation was primarily focused on preventative research and preventative programs, but not all the prevention works, unfortunately. And you get people like myself who have heart disease and don't know it because it's not causing a problem, and then they'll drop dead, and they need people to be able to resuscitate them. So the Heart Foundation are now
right.
focusing on cardiac arrest and resuscitation programs as well, which is fantastic.
Absolutely.
Right.
Well, we're
They
so happy
did
to
a
have
great
you
job with
still here
that.
today. Still very, very, very
Yes.
happy you're still with us today.
Well, thank you.
And
Yes, we do.
because of the amazing work of those first responders, we got to see you on stage as a Wiggle again in the reunion tour. But more recently, you have become the president of the United States, and you are
Yes.
performing in the current musical adaptation of Annie. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What you're doing right now?
Yeah, well, literally, I am about to head off. Actually, I'm going to have to wrap this up because I've got to head into the theatre. Yeah, so I was asked last year to play a role in Annie, the musical here in Australia, and this actually came about through John Field, through his connection to musicals that he'd done and people that he knows. The producers of Annie, the musical, were looking for somebody to play the role of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and they reached out to me and they said, "Would you like to do this?" Now, I'd always wanted to try being in musicals, but I've never been really confident of my singing ability. Yes, I've sung with the Wiggles many times, but singing in musicals is very, very different. And the caliber, the quality of these musical theatre performers when they sing is absolutely phenomenal. So to be offered this opportunity, I thought, well, it's a fairly small kind of role. It'll be able to give me a bit of a taste for what musical theatre is like and do it in a way that's manageable. So yeah, I took on the role, and yeah, I'm doing it and I'm having a great time. It's really enjoyable. And I've got to say, the cast have been amazing in welcoming me into the theatre world, but also just incredibly talented. And I guess it confirms my thoughts that being part of the musical theatre world, you do have to be very, very good. And these guys are absolutely incredible. Even the kids that are playing the orphans and the kids that are playing Annie, they're all just so gifted and talented. And I know they've got a big future ahead of them in that world. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm really loving it.
That's wonderful. So
That's
so
great.
so Tyler,
Great.
take us on with the last question
All right,
since
all right, we got to wrap this up just to respect your time. But one more question: what does nostalgia mean to you?
Nostalgia for me is it's about connecting with a happy place, right? So when you're a child, a lot of those feelings and emotions that you have and you hold on to, you'll hear things, you'll see things later on in life, and you'll be connected to those happy moments. And to me, that's what nostalgia is. So it's when it brings about that feeling of safety, security, of just being so content. that's why I love the name of the show, the Happy Nostalgia Show, right? And
Thank you.
being nostalgic is about reminiscing about the good times and the emotions that flow from those good times that you've had. So that's what this is all about for me. And to know that the Wiggles has been a part of people's lives in that
Yes,
happy, nostalgic way makes me so happy and so content as well.
absolutely.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Well, Greg, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. As we said earlier, a huge pleasure having you on our podcast, and we're very glad that we were finally able to make this happen. I know scheduling and things didn't exactly align in the beginning, but I'm glad we were finally able to make this happen. So thank you very much.
I just
Got
wanted
there in
to
the end,
say,
yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, not take up too much of it. This was like bucket list for me. I'm a touring musician now.
Yeah, us too.
I'm a touring musician now. I think it's because of the Wiggles. I would say it's the first music I ever heard. So I think just thank you, Greg, for everything you've done.
That's
for me,
awesome,
for
mate.
sure. So
Yes,
yeah.
thank you very much.
Have a
Yeah.
great show. Have a great show today. Kill it. Have a good
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Good luck,
I
Greg.
got two. Yeah, we got
So
we've got a
happy
matinee and then a
about that.
nighttime one. So yeah.
Ooh,
All right.
should be
Well,
fun.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you,
Wonderful.
Mr. President. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yes,
Appreciate it.
absolutely. Enjoy the rest of your day, Greg.
All right. Thank you,
All right,
Greg.
Thank you.
One question,
See you,
me,
gents.
Greg. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, mate.
And it's goodbye from us as well. We absolutely enjoyed our time with the wonderful Greg Page, and also a big thank you to our good friend Tyler for once again agreeing to be a guest co-host for this wonderful, amazing episode.
Yes, you. Yes, you.
That was a
Topics.
wild one, guys. That was a wild one, but
Yes, it was so
was-
great.
like, you,
Right. Yeah, you all know how it goes. Yes.
Yeah.
Greg's got a lot of wonderful places that you can contact him, and links to those will be in the description down below for anyone who wants to connect with Greg or check out his wonderful, amazing work. But it's goodbye from us as well. Keep on the lookout for more wonderful interviews coming your way. And as always, what do we say, Jake?
Yes, keep nostalgia alive, and remember, of course, keep on wiggling
Yes,
and
keep
keep the beat
wiggling.
going.
don't do
Yes,
drugs.
exactly.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean that too. See you next time,
Stay-
everyone. Take
Stay
care.
in school,
Bye.
drink water, don't do drugs, don't talk to the scary guy at the end of the street.
And keep wiggling.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another wonderful Jake's Happy Nostalgia Show episode. Be sure to follow Jake and the Happy Nostalgia team on social media, check out our website, and stream the show wherever you find your favorite podcasts. And as always, remember to keep nostalgia alive. Bye-bye.